Right, hello everyone. This is actually my first coffee hour. My name's Laura, my pronouns are she, they. I'm based in New Zealand, so it's pretty early here, so a nice 7 a.m. start, which is always good. So I got to see the sunset this morning. So I am a PhD candidate at the University of Auckland. So I'm about halfway through my PhD now, and I'm primarily a cosmologist and astrophysicist. So I work on gravitational wave physics, looking at supermassive black holes for the future laser interferometer space antenna, which I just saw the news that they've finally moved into selecting a contractor to build the antenna now. So this is a detector due to launch in 2035. We'll see how delayed that gets. So it's primarily being built by the ESA with hopefully still some funding from NASA. So a very big project for the 2030s. I'm originally from the UK, so I moved to New Zealand to do my PhD. I'm more than just a physicist, so some things I like doing in my spare time. I'm a very outdoorsy person. That was actually my main reason for moving to New Zealand. This photo here is actually about half an hour away from where I live. A really nice hike. I'm big into bird watching recently. We've got some very cool birds in New Zealand. The first half of my presentation is basically just a pitch to get people to come and visit New Zealand because I think it's great. But these birds are called takahe, and they're flightless, quite big dinosaur-looking birds, which are very cute. And there's only about 500 of them left here. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I've been in various types of SciComm since I was an undergrad in the UK. So in the UK, I mostly focused on kind of equity initiatives. So I worked a lot in improving accessibility for underrepresented groups in STEM. So the main one I did was I worked as the student rep for the Southwest branch of the Institute of Physics back in the UK. But I always knew I was very interested in SciComm, and I was figuring out how to kind of move into that field. So moving to New Zealand, I looked around a little bit. So I'm now a part-time planetarium presenter at my local planetarium. And I've recently picked up a project in the School of Education, working in science education research. Even though I'm an astrophysicist, I'm actually working on a project about plants and plant blindness, which is very cool. It's always good to do new things. I work in a Women in Science club and do some outreach, and I thought I'd just include some fun photos I took. So this is through a half-meter telescope in the planetarium. This is just like kind of eighth of the moon. And one of my favorite things about the Southern Hemisphere is the Southern Hemisphere sky. So you can see the Large Magellanic Cloud here, which is a dwarf satellite galaxy. And you get some really beautiful, clear, dark skies. As I said, this is mostly a pitch to come to New Zealand. But anyway, on to the content I produced for the JNIPER Fellows. So I just have to say, I really loved being part of this group. It's been so useful. I've learned so much. So I produced 3 different pieces of content. I mostly focused on writing because I do a lot of public talking, talking immediately from my brain, but actually pulling things down onto paper and making sure they read well is a very different skill. So I produced a cover story for the PhysicsQuest kit on light. I produced a newsletter article, which some of you may have read already. And finally, I did a little bit for social media. So I produced an Instagram post for the Women in Science Club I'm involved with. So I'll start with the PhysicsQuest story and why I chose Lena Howe. So Lena Howe is a Danish physicist who in the early 2000s used a Bose-Einstein condensate to slow down light. And as this really isn't my field, I'm very much a theoretical physicist. I had to do a lot of learning for what she actually did. But I mostly chose her because I wanted to move away from this kind of child genius stereotype that a lot of our more famous physicists that people know think about. So Lena Howe had a fairly long career in theoretical physics first. So she attained her PhD by the age of 32. By this time, she had realized she wanted to move from theoretical research to experimental. And this is not something people do very often, at least in the 90s. So she really struggled with getting any funding to do experimental work and was basically told, you're a theoretical physicist, we're not going to give you money to build an experimental setup. So she had to find alternative funding. Took many years of trial and error to actually build up her setup. A couple of years, I think it eventually took. So I thought I'd include just a few quotes from the cover story itself. So the main one was trying to explain what a Bose-Einstein condensate is to a middle schooler, which, as someone who I don't think I even understood it when I was an undergraduate, was a very difficult thing to do, but I actually learned a lot by having to try and explain it. So the way I went about is using lots of analogies, lots of examples. So in the cover story, I talked about how kind of density works using an analogy in like a crowded hallway, that the hallway is like people are really chaotic, it's really hard to get through because people are moving around everywhere. The way I explained it for a BAC is that it's kind of all moving together in one as this kind of huge super atom, this huge marching band. And it's hard to kind of get through the band. And then I also wanted to kind of make her a whole person as well. I think I at some point got really into the science behind it and realized that I needed to find more about her life as a person. And there's a really nice quote from her where she talks about eating pizza during these really long kind of 12, 14-hour days in the lab, where they would have just 30 seconds to adjust all of the mirrors. So she said they were basically eating pizza with one hand and adjusting mirrors with the other, which I thought was really nice, some really nice imagery. And I included a little example as well that kind of breaks the piece up. So it's the classic seeing how light gets bent and refracted in water. So this was near the start of the cover story, talking about changes in speed from kind of air to water. So it's just like a little example, telling them to grab a glass and put a pencil in, a very classic, easy experiment to do. So yeah, lots of imagery, lots of kind of analogies for that one. Then my second piece was looking more with social media. So for the Women in Science Club, we have a big Instagram, and I decided to do a kind of Instagram interview post with a previous executive member of the club. So our color scheme, as you can probably tell, is purple and orange. So my good friend Miriam, who is now a PhD student at Oxford, gave me a really great interview response. So you can see I had a lot of fun with the design of this one. So I tried to get a good mix of questions to explain the science, but also a very personal side. So it's a very kind of well-rounded interview. And the answers that Miriam gave me were really wonderful as well. Also helps that she's very into outreach and science communication too. So she gave me this really nice example of the quantum car to explain to explain quanta. So this was the kind of start of the example, which I think is really good. And I think if I ever have to talk about quantum, I'm definitely stealing that example. And then finally, I did a piece for the JNIPER newsletter. I really enjoyed writing this piece, mostly I think because it was a personal piece, and it really allowed me to reflect on my work in informal physics education. So I've been working in the planetarium for about 1.5 years now, and my confidence in talking has just skyrocketed from just this role alone. And I think the fact that in a planetarium, you're in the dark and people can't see you and you can't rely on facial features really helped with that confidence and thinking more about how I say things, how fast or slow I talk, where the emphasis goes on each word. And it was really nice to write a piece that reflected on this. So I also reflected then on using narratives in science education to make things more engaging. And I realized that I had been doing that in my shows and never really noticed it explicitly until I started the JNIPER Fellows program. So I've kind of been constantly improving my shows, and I love that every show is different every time with different people. It keeps it super interesting. And I think my favorite part of this newsletter I wrote was basically explaining that we have been using narratives to pass on knowledge for, as long as we've been looking up at the stars. So I use the idea of, we have constellations from like the ancient Greeks, and here in New Zealand, we have Maury astronomy as well. And these narratives are what our ancestors would have used to explain the world to their children. So we're kind of built to be convinced by stories, essentially. So one of the main things I learned is that people aren't really convinced by facts. They are convinced by stories. And I think about this all the time. And it's probably the one main thing I learned during this program. And then also that sharing science isn't about just giving people so much kind of content and just hoping that they'll believe you. It's a lot about how people are feeling while they're learning that science. And I think that's so important. And I think that also comes from my work in equity spaces. I definitely want to blend equity and SciComm together. I think you can't have one without the other for sure. And then also so much more. But those were the main takeaways that have really, really stuck with me. So what is next? I actually have a very busy couple months coming up in kind of science communication spaces. The most exciting one is that I am now being employed as a professional teaching fellow to help lecture the first year undergraduate astronomy course here. So it's a huge course, 200 to 300 students per semester. And basically one of our lecturers is going on parental leave. So there was a space that needed to be filled pretty quickly. So I'm actually going to be starting lecturing in August, which is very scary, but very exciting. And it's a really cool course, and any student, even if they're kind of in humanities or the arts, can come and take it. So it's a course that really doesn't have much maths in it. It's very much equipping people to be able to pick apart maybe misinformation about astronomy. And also mostly people take it because they think space is cool. And I really want to continue hoping that people enjoy space. And then I'll also be doing a talk called Raising the Bar, which is similar to kind of like Pint of Science, where academic talks in bars across Auckland. So it's an annual event that has a lot of like publicity before. So there's 20 speakers who are academics from the university, and we do a bit of like radio and TV appearances before the talk. So that's at the end of August. So a very busy August for me, I think. And then post-PhD, yeah, basically looking for a career in science communication or physics education research. So we'll see what that brings. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening. There's a QR code if you wanted to contact me, but big thank you to all the organizers of JNIPER Fellows. Like, I've loved this 6 months so much, and to my fellow cohort as well. We've had some great discussions. So yeah, thanks, and stay in touch.
Thank you, Laura. That was great. So I'm going to screen share now. Our next presenter, Olivia, our next fellow, Olivia, is unfortunately mid-air right now, and we decided that in-air Wi-Fi was not reliable enough for the Zoom call. So she has pre-recorded her presentation. So I'm going to share my screen so you all can hear from her directly, and then we'll keep going on with her presentation. So give me one moment to share and make sure that the audio is working.
My name is Olivia, and this is my presentation for JNIPER Coffee Hour. So I am a third-year physics undergrad at UT Austin, Hook'em Horns, and my research interests on computational material science. I'm in a research lab that studies solid-state batteries, and I really like that. So why I chose to apply to this fellowship, I'm really interested in science communication because both of my families are immigrants, or both sides of my family are immigrants, and especially during the COVID pandemic, I saw how they really struggled to find information that was accessible to them, not only in their native languages, even though they're fluent in English. A lot of the science communication had a lot of jargon and stuff, and if you weren't educated in English, it was really hard for a lot of immigrants to understand. And another reason why I applied to this fellowship is because I do really like communicating. I am a certified yapper. I can talk for forever and on, especially about science and things I'm passionate about. So, yeah. So the first piece that I wrote was for the International Year of Quantum blog. I wrote a story that talked about nitrogen fertilizers, catalysts, and density functional theory, which is a computational tool that solves approximate versions of the Schrodinger equation and is useful to model materials and stuff like that. So anyways, if you don't know the history about like nitrogen fertilizers or like ammonia, it's very, very interesting and very, very rich. Um, it's super important for modern agriculture. About 4 billion people rely on artificial fertilizers, so it's super duper important. And basically, like people have fought wars over bird poop because it had a high concentration of nitrogen. And so before there was this nitrogen fertilizers, these artificial ones, everyone was really worried about starvation and stuff like that. And yeah, fighting wars over bird poop. And then a chemist was able to discover a method for turning the nitrogen in our air into a usable form of nitrogen called ammonia. And he did this by implementing a catalyst. But the thing is, they didn't really understand the surface of the catalyst and how that affected the reaction. So his successors just kept improving his method through kind of like trial and error, and there wasn't a clear understanding. And then in 2005, computation has gotten a lot better. Density functional theory is still kind of this new, not necessarily new, but it wasn't as popular as it is today. And a team of scientists were able to use density functional theory to characterize the whole surface of the catalyst and to really understand what was driving that reaction. And it was a really interesting study and a really interesting story. So I had a lot of fun writing about that. And then the main takeaway I wanted people to get from this article was I hear this a lot that quantum mechanics just produces like random, uninterpretable, nonsensical results. And I think that's a very common like myth for people who aren't trained in physics is that like quantum mechanics, no one understands it, it's super crazy and whack and all of that. But I wanted to prove like despite its statistical nature and all the philosophical puzzles in it, quantum mechanics has been really helpful in science and has really um, driven tangible progress. So yeah. Another thing I wrote was a PhysicsQuest cover story. Again, this was concerning quantum science, and I wrote about this girl, Elisa, and I actually got to meet her. I did an interview for her, and it was really cool because she was about my age, or she basically is my age, another like college age student. And basically, in the article, I wrote about her childhood and how she got into quantum computing which was like through a course she took during the COVID pandemic. And then she founded this organization called Girls in Quantum, where she tries to democratize quantum sciences and make it accessible to girls across the globe. You don't need to be in a first world country to be able to interact and make contributions to quantum sciences. So that was really cool. And the main takeaways from this article, I wanted to highlight diverse scientist. She is a young woman from Chile, and so like you don't have to be an old white man to be a scientist, and just break down that stereotype a lot of people had. I wrote about quantum computers, especially the audience for the cover stories are like middle schoolers, so that was really fun because I got to write it in Spanish, and I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker. I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. I've been learning Spanish for a couple of years, so I still have a very limited vocabulary. So it was fun to write for middle schoolers with a limited vocabulary because I couldn't even introduce jargon, or I don't know lots of big words. So it's easy because I was forced to write at a appropriate age level, I think. And overall, what I learned from this program, one is I don't have to be an expert to write about something. At the start of this program, I was really, really nervous about writing about quantum sciences and quantum mechanics in general, just because like I'm an undergraduate, I've taken one course about it. I just had a lot of fear that I would like be inaccurate or fuck something up. And so then I got hyped by this community and lots of support, and they made me realize like that is the point about like writers and communicators, is you don't have to be an expert in the subject. Your job is to communicate and explain these really hard topics. And so yeah, no one expects you to be an expert, so that was reassuring to hear. Another thing is I knew is really important, but really, really hooks are like what grabs the attentions or how you start. And one thing that I really took away from one of our workshops is you don't have to start from like the chronological beginning. You can use a hook to just say what's interesting and grab that attention and then sort of flow into your story. There's no like strict way to like flow, if that makes sense. So like your hook can just be whatever is really interesting and whatever grabs the attention. And then another thing is about storytelling. In our workshops, we had learned about how important storytelling is. People remember stories, not data. Storytelling, storytelling, storytelling. Like that is what is important. But I think I took this too far, where I'd forget like, oh, the whole point of this is communicating science, and I'd get really lost in the story, that I wouldn't name drop people or provide that much details, even though I had it. I was like really concerned about the story. And so when people were editing my articles, they were like, you still have to name these people, put the dates, you need to add these details so people understand your credibility, and it doesn't necessarily take away from the story. So even though you need to tell a story, do not forget about the science and the details and the facts and fleshing it out to be more than just a story, which was very helpful to sort of learn about this balance of storytelling and also science. And what are my next steps? I really, really enjoyed this fellowship more than I thought I would. I liked writing articles, so that's something I would want to do in the future. I applied for an internship at my university, so hopefully I can continue doing some type of science communication. And even if it's not like a formalized internship, I definitely think that I'm going to take a lot of these lessons just to be better at explaining my research, because I do hope to be a researcher in my future. So a lot of these lessons I learned will be really helpful for like grant proposals, research talks, and all of that. So I'm super grateful, and that's it for me. Bye.
Well, thank you, Olivia. We'll send our thanks up to 30,000 feet or wherever she currently is in the sky. And I want to echo just what she said, that she was really nervous to write about quantum mechanics, feeling like she didn't know enough. And through the fellowship, she really, I think, grew in that regard and produced some excellent content that is focused on quantum mechanics. And so her blog that she mentioned for IYQ should be posted, I think, within the next month. We'll try to alert the Juniper community when it's published via our newsletter and on Slack. So stay tuned for that. And also kudos to Olivia for writing. I think this is our first PhysicsQuest story that will be written in Spanish, I think. So that is really great to see. And she did the English translation as well. Okay, so moving along, I think our next speaker is Elle.
My name is Elle Roc. I am one of the JNIPER Fellows for this year. It has been such a fantastic time, and I'm really excited to talk about my takeaways and just the wonderful time I've had with my fellows and what I've learned. So a little bit about me. I was a physics undergraduate at Pomona College in California, which almost no one has heard about, but I promise it exists and it was wonderful. And I took a gap year, which I'm a huge advocate about because I was going through a lot of personal stuff. And yeah, if you need a break, take a break. It actually helps. It's great. And I'm an incoming PhD student at the Columbia Astronomy and Astrophysics Department, and I'm hoping to do astrophysical instrumentation. So if anyone has experience in that, please hit me up. I'm a huge space nerd. I'm a huge media nerd, radio host, and barista, which that will actually come into play later on. I love to hike, and first and foremost, I am just a huge people lover, which I think really informs my communication style, which hopefully will come through in my presentation. So when it comes to SciComm, a few things I care about, I feel like this could be distilled into 4 main categories. One of the things that got me into SciComm was the fact that I realized when I started getting really into science towards the end of high school, beginning of college, I realized a lot of science news and science communication was like really bad, jargony pop science that didn't really seem very accurate. And I was really confused by what was actually happening in the research world. And so like just worldwide access to inclusive, interesting, and accurate science communication is really important to me. Also just inspiring the next generation and supporting those in pre and early career science. I started out my SciComm journey in high school. I ran like a women in STEM group, but I wanted to go beyond just my community and like make digital connections as well. And throughout my time as a JNIPER Fellow, I learned a lot about the Science Trust Project. So now I've been really, really interested, especially in today's climate, with like furthering like trust in science and fostering relationships between scientists and non-scientists. And I'm also really interested in contributing to science policy and inspiring the government to fund science. And this will all play out in the presentation. I was going to do an interactive thing, but I don't think I have time, so I'm sorry. It would have been great to get to know y'all a little bit better because audience is everything. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the projects I did for the fellowship. The first one, hopefully some of you have read. It was a profile for the JNIPER newsletter. Actually, both of the people I interviewed are on this call right now, so no pressure. But feel free to pipe up actually if you want to say anything. But this profile really, I think, touched on the goal of furthering foundational public trust in science and scientists and fostering relationships with non-scientists. Because Jen, whom I interviewed, is the APS Civic Science Fellow, which is a fantastic program. You can go read about it more on their website or in the newsletter. But she's basically an expert at inclusive science communication and is fostering these relationships and trust in science basically every day. And the reason why Jen and I were initially connected is because she actually has 2 degrees in music education before getting her PhD in instructional technology. And I'm a musician, and I was like, okay, that is cool to have started your career in something seemingly so different, and then finding yourself in this really fantastic leadership position, making large strides every day to make science and science communication more accessible, especially to LGBTQ and disabled folks. Her work's really cool. And so in our conversation, we talked a lot about the importance of finding communities of practice who, believe also in building the science trust or an inclusive science communication, and how her interdisciplinary background has informed that, and community building generally, and also science communication in any location, how it doesn't need to be a formal space or even a communication designated space, which I'll talk about in a minute. One of the largest challenges, though, for writing this piece was the fact that we had almost an hour-long conversation, and I had to distill it down to about 400, maybe I pushed it a bit, words. So learning how to write for a specific avenue, for a specific audience, was a lot of work, but thankfully the JNIPER leaders, thank you, Ali and Meg and Nicole and Claudia and everyone, taught us how to do that really, really well. But I wanted to share a paragraph excerpt from the piece because I was really inspired by Jen's ability to create an arena for science communication anywhere. So I'm going to read it out. Shouldn't take too long. This is the final paragraph of the newsletter. Our power and our strength to change minds lies in the deeply human connections we can forge anywhere, not just in our labs or in designated science communication spaces, but also on our Uber drives and at the farmer's market, a practice Parsons infuses into her daily affairs. With compassion and the pursuit of understanding shared values, any location can be an arena for science communication and building trust. And Parsons is indubitably an expert in navigating these conversations for positive change. Find those spaces, she advises. Every time that you're out in the world, you can be an ambassador for science. It's just a matter of how you learn to speak to the people around you. So it was really inspiring speaking with Jen. And to be honest, I mentioned earlier that I'm a barista, and this conversation changed my life. I've started doing a lot more science communication with just people around me at the coffee shop, my customers, people who agree with me, people who don't agree with me on certain things, people who are just interested in learning more, people who have taught me a lot of things, and especially the kids who come in. I've just learned so much and gotten to forge so many connections around science at this job. So huge thanks from the bottom of my heart to you, Jen, and it was a really fun piece to write. Okay, so the second project is in progress. It's getting there. It's almost done, but it was an audio podcast / cover story for the International Year of Quantum, featuring Paul Kaden-Demansky, who's also on this call. Hello, hope you're doing well. And this project sort of focused more on the contributing to civic life, science policy, and inspiring the government to fund science side of things. It was fantastic to talk to Paul because he is one of the original creators of the International Year of Quantum, which we heard about before in the last presentation. And his story is really inspiring because he has a science background, but he literally has a global political impact by being able to take everything that's really important about quantum and talking about it to almost any audience, up to and including being able to convince every country in the UN, being able to convince UNESCO that International Year of Quantum needs to happen. And we had a really fun conversation. It's really hard to distill it into 15 to 20 minutes of audio. But we got philosophical with it. We talked about paradigm shifts in science. But one really interesting thing we talked about is really the ubiquity and fundamental nature of quantum, how quantum really is something fundamental to all of us and to how science works, and how understanding that can change the way we teach it. For example, in our conversation, Paul had a fantastic example likening an analogy likening quantum to quantum discovery to DNA discovery, and how DNA is something really fundamental to how all living creatures work. And here, just take a listen. I'll let him talk about it.
I think everybody would say it's kind of useful to have that understanding of this is very central to biology, that all living things have DNA or RNA in them, and that kind of binds living things together. And quantum is sort of similar in a sense, is whatever quantum is, it's connecting everything, not just living things, but everything. But unlike DNA, the average person doesn't really have much of a handle of like, what does the word quantum mean? Like, what is quantum mechanics? Like, why is it important? So I think that our ability to communicate about it has gotten better. And my hope is that this 100-year anniversary and the International Quantum is a moment where we can really accelerate the process of giving the people the invitation to learn more about quantum, coming up with better ways of communicating about quantum and teaching quantum to anyone, so that it becomes more like DNA and people are like, oh, everybody in the schools should learn something about quantum and we should be teaching that at different levels. And it's not like, you know, an 11th grader is going to take a full quantum mechanics class, but to at least mention quantum mention is important. That's kind of the place where we're at in terms of education. And I think the International Quantum can really accelerate that process for more people learning about quantum and getting it into the educational system.
So yeah, that was just one. Honestly, every quote is inspiring. But it really did inspire me that, you know, a lot of his work is ensuring that, you know, the figuring out ways to teach this so that it can be instilled into the education system at every level, and also convincing countries to be like, hey, this is something you should care about. And echoing from the last presentation, you know, you don't need to be in a first world country to be able to make impacts in the quantum sciences. So it was really inspiring, and I'm really excited for that to come out.
I think everybody.
Oh, sorry. So the third project, it's a very interesting story. I won't talk about it fully, but I did get to learn a lot about the PhysicsQuest kit cover story on sound, which is really, since it's for middle school audiences, inspiring the next generation to pursue science, or in my case, to pursue interdisciplinary science. I can't talk too much about it because it was honestly a huge lesson in journalism, because the publicist for the person I was going to write about is not quite excited about having this person's likeness affiliated with APS, which is a shame. But I still learned so much from this project. One, just writing it, it turns out I love complex sentences, and learning how to be more concise and succinct in my communication has helped me out in areas all throughout my life. But also like learning how to deal with you know, difficult journalistic entities, or learning how to stay focused when something doesn't go your way, and learning the journalistic side of science communication was really, really useful, and I'm honestly applying it in my job now. So even though I'll have to figure out a different avenue to publish a PhysicsQuest kit cover story, this is not a failure. This was just a way to learn more. So some main takeaways, since I'm running out of time, honestly, I learned that the way that the world and world politics, especially from the IYQ project, sees science really does depend on informal science communication a lot. And I think it's really important that every phys learns these skills. And SciComm also doesn't have to always include huge campaigns. We learned about like how improv and comedy shows and like a random Instagram post can contribute to normalizing inclusive science communication and the way that science is perceived throughout the world. And I'm really hoping to take this into my own life, and coming up with initiatives, even if I don't have time for a full-blown campaign. And I learned this a lot from speaking with Jen. You can practice SciComm literally anywhere, on the bus, at the farmer's market, and it's already radically changed my life, and I'm really excited to see what happens next. So moving forward, what I'm most excited about is I know that I have this community of the fellows and also of the larger JNIPER community for the rest of my life. And I think that is just going to be a really uplifting way to remind myself that I can do this anywhere and that I don't have to stop now that the fellowship is over. And it's already made a huge difference in my life. Right now, I'm a science policy intern at the American Institute of Physics, and I got the job because I learned so much about inclusive science communication. So I'm hoping that that continues. And as I start my PhD program, I remember when I was applying, I wrote in my statement of research intent, like, I want to disseminate my work widely and inclusively. But what does that actually mean? I didn't know how to do that. And this fellowship taught me a lot of tools where I think I'll be able to actually make a difference. And I'm really, really excited for that. Anyway, so that's a little bit about me and my projects. It was a blast being part of this crew, and I'm really excited to see what projects and collaborations come in the future. If you have any questions, feel free, or just want to chat, I'd love to. I'm also a D1 yapper, so connect with me on Instagram, my email, or LinkedIn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elle. Let's thank our speaker. That was awesome. And also shout out to Elle for creating the first audio story of our group this year. So that was that's really exciting that we had fellows producing content in different media or mediums. But I want to make sure we have time for our last speaker, last but not least, Richard, to talk about his projects, and then we'll have some more time for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Ali, for the introduction.
Of course.
So I'll talk briefly about myself, and then I wrote about Sottie cannot as per PhysicsQuest cover story, and then I'm also contributing for the International Year of Quantum. But this presentation, I'll just focus on the PhysicsQuest story. I'll talk briefly about some takeaways from the JNIPER Fellowship, and then I'll also discuss my future plans for science communication. So I'm from Ghana, West Africa. And I'm a fifth year PhD student in Ohio University. I'm working in the computational condensed matter physics group, and I focus on plasmonics. But plasmonics, I'm trying to study the optical properties of good nanoparticles, and then also see the applications in sensing. I volunteered in a number of science communication activities in a local science museum in Ohio University, and in a high school here. We did some demonstration to explain some concept in physics for middle schoolers and high school students. I chose to talk about Sottie Cannot because he was young, and he was born at a time when there was a lot of conflict in Europe, when the French and then the British were fighting. But he still got some time. There was a lot of distraction, but he still had some time to talk to focus on science and make some groundbreaking research. So you don't have to be old enough, in order to bring some groundbreaking research in science, or even when there's distraction, like we have mobile phones, we have social media all over, you can still set aside some time and then do science and then come up with a groundbreaking research. He was a son of a French aristocrat. He was an engineer and then a physicist. He joined the military after his studies as a military engineer, but he was not happy because the role that was assigned to him in the military was not did not match his expertise. So he asked for promotion, and then he was denied. So as a result, he focused on steam engines. In the 19th century, steam engines powered nearly everything from factories, locomotives, and then boats, but they have a major problem. They were highly inefficient. The efficiency at the time was 3%. Most of the energy that you gain from you get is lost as heat and noise. So he wanted to improve the efficiency. And at one point, he thought that the French lost to the war to the British, because the British had better steam engines than the French. So he wanted to better the French, the steam engines in France. He introduced this concept called Carnot cycle. So before that, he set out to solve some questions, some key questions. The first one is there a limit to how much power we can maximize from heat input? And then could there be a better fuel other than the steam? The Carnot cycle consists of 4 processes. It's a thermodynamic cycle that defines the maximum possible efficiency you can ever get from a heat engine. The first step is isothermal process, where the system is in contact with a heat reservoir, and then it expands. Heat flows into the system through isothermal expansion. The second step is adiabatic expansion. The system expands without inflow of heat. And the third step is isothermal compression, where the system is in contact with a cold reservoir. Heat flows from the system to a cold reservoir. And the fourth step is adiabatic compression. Here the system compresses, but there's no heat flow into or out of the system. He introduced this concept of reversibility. So basically, a heat engine is a device that takes heat from a hot reservoir and then use some part of the heat to do work, and then it releases part of the heat to a cold reservoir. But then he said these engines can also work in a reverse mode. So you use work to pump heat from a cold reservoir and then transfer it to a hot reservoir. He also found out that the efficiency of the cycle, of the Carnot cycle, does not depend on the type of fuel used, but then it depends on the temperature difference between the cold and then the hot reservoir. Unfortunately, Carnot died very young at the age of 36 from the French cholera epidemic. And because of that, he had a lot of unpublished works, a lot of articles, notes, and papers, and they were buried due to the fear of contamination from the disease. But his work was expanded by other scientists like Rudolf Diesel and Lord Kelvin, and he's highly recognized as the father of thermodynamics. So I chose to talk about Carnot because, like I said earlier, there's a lot of distractions here. We don't have like the kind of large scale war, like the world wars and all that. But then we have a lot of distractions like social media. We also have, there are some people that think you have to be a scientist when you're like 90 years or 80 years, but you still have to, you can also be young and do science. And then when there are a lot of distractions, you can also set aside the time and then do some groundbreaking research in science. From the JNIPER Fellow program, I learned that science can effectively be communicated when you know your audience, whether they are high school students or PhD students, or whether they have some visual or hearing impairment. And also when your content is clear, accessible to all, and is accurate. You don't want to spread false information. So my future plans, I plan to write about science blogs on Medium so that I'll explain like complex topics in engaging and understandable in a way that is engaging and understandable. I also plan to use Canva to design and share science infographic on social media platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for sharing about the story that you wrote for PhysicsQuest. And I'll also note Richard is working on an IYQ blog that will be coming out later this summer. So again, as with all the Fellows content, we will be sure to alert the JNIPER community as it becomes live. You're getting an exclusive preview to things that are coming out over this summer. So before we have a couple of questions that we can discuss as a group, I want to give Olivia a chance to introduce herself. Unfortunately, her flight was delayed, but fortunately for us, that means she can join. So, hey, Olivia.
Hi. So yeah, my flight got delayed like 2 hours and we were stuck in the plane, but they just let us out to use the bathroom and for me to introduce myself. But yeah, I'm an undergraduate at UT Austin and I'm heading back to Austin after spending a whole semester in Mexico City, and I've been really enjoying this JNIPER Fellows Science Communication program. I feel like it's really pushed me, and I love one of like the best things about the program has been like we get professional feedback on our writing, and like we just get to learn from all of these workshops, and we get to network with such great people. So yeah, I'm sorry I missed the first part, but it's nice to see y'all, meet y'all.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm glad you were, well, glad you were able to join us. And I apologize, or I'm sorry to hear that you were stuck on your plane, delayed for many hours. That is never fun.